as you reflect back on the state of not normal, average mental health out there 16 years ago versus today, what things do you observe? What things have changed in mental health? Where are we today in 2022 as far as mental health status?
If I look back compared to now, I would say the statistics back then would have been, say, 1 in 5 that I would work with that have mainly depression, anxiety. I'd had some people that I would look at or, been referred with psychiatrists that have had either, type 2 bipolar. But now, Casey, it's like 1 in 2. Like it's quite significant. And I always say, if we look at the landscape of, nutrition and what that actually looks like, no one is actually eating really what I call species appropriate way of eating. We're eating food like substances. It's creating a massive addiction. And also too, we must not forget that the connection between, what we put in our body also creates anxiety in our body because it's inflamed and it's in chaos mode. So it's kind of like, how do we operate in a body that is literally trying to survive instead of thrive? And food, again, it's about understanding, well, what is a species human appropriate diet? What are we meant to eat to thrive? And I guess what your listeners are going to hear today is probably going to challenge a lot of that, what we believe is true versus what we've been hypnotized to eat.
Yeah, that's a really good way of saying that. And I say this all the time. We started this podcast 2 years ago to talk about health and fitness. And I thought we'd be talking about diet and maybe some exercises. And I guess I'm not surprised by this anymore, but initially I was shocked by how many times mental health would come up in the conversation. We talk about it probably more than any other topic. And so it's interesting that you're noticing much more of that. That's certainly what it sounds like. 1 in 2, are you saying that's like general population, like 50%?
Pretty much, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's crazy. Okay.
And also too, we're not lacking in pharmaceuticals, right? We're pretty much covered in that bucket, but it's getting worse, and we really have to go back to, and what I treat, you cannot treat symptoms. It just, that's what the pharma industry is, right? It treats Band-Aid processes. Whereas, we look at root cause. Let's get to the root cause of conscious, unconscious programming, your negative self-image, and also the psychological attachments that we have to food and emotions, and stop eating your emotions. And most of the time when we eat our emotions, we're eating really, really crap food. We're not eating nutritionally dense food.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So let's talk about that species appropriate diet. How has your thinking evolved in the 16 years that you've been doing this? What did you originally think, and how has that thinking around a species appropriate diet changed over time for you?
Yeah. So, as again, going back and being really quite lucky to look at Abra Hoffman's work and Lilas Pauling, and, the kind of psychiatric nutritional base back then was definitely removing things like wheat and gluten, even back then, because of the fact that, they are non-nutritional, proper nutrient foods. They're full of glyphosate now as well. Don't know back then, because I wasn't actually into, looking at glyphosate 16 years ago, but I'm pretty sure it was quite prominent. It even just recently, over 80% of female adults, male, female, and children, urine tested was full of glyphosate. So again, we've just got to be really mindful of where that's coming from a gut point, and how that's affecting our mind. But secondly, it was literally about protein and fat is the core of what we are, a species. It's like anything on this planet, we are species. So you must look at what we need as a core nutritional foundation to make ourselves thrive and to make our guts work and create the correct neurotransmitters for our brains to work properly. So back then it was literally pull out anything that's artificial, colors, flavors, preservatives, MSG, all of those things. Wheat, gluten, gone. It's really bad for your brain. I'm not sure if anyone is aware of, there's a protein in gluten that's very, very bad. And especially it can create leaky gut. And also too, most people aren't aware, it causes inflammation. So you don't have to be celiac to have an issue with it. I see so many clients that have inflammation responses from eating wheat. And basically their face will go red, or they'll get little pimples at the back of their arms. And that's just letting you know that your body's not happy. So we've got to listen, right? Nowadays, in relation to looking at the connection between ketones and glucose for the brain, I'm working with my clients on a very low carb into a carnivore way of eating to literally reset the body and to use nutrition as a healing protocol. And the amount of results, that I see both mentally and physically, because we're using food as medicine and healing process, right? We're not using food to get into a size 8 jeans.
Yeah, no, you're right. Absolutely. And so when I hear you say back then you were eliminating a bunch of stuff, that's starting to sound like that by nature of it is going to turn into a low carbohydrate or a near carnivore type diet. What was the difference in the addition of things? Was it like you originally weren't cutting out fruits and vegetables, or you originally weren't cutting out things like rice?
Yeah. So again, if we look back at the protocol back then, that a small amount of carbs was okay and fruit was okay. I think where I've changed now, because we're getting metabolically sicker and sicker as human beings, I'm literally like, if you're really metabolically unwell, you've got to get rid of all carbs or fructose or sugar for the body to heal and reset. So yeah, things have changed in relation to how I look at it. But again, that was also my own learning process around going, well, hold on, if you've got someone with really bad gut issues and they've got depression, plants need to go. And that might be quite shocking to people, but plants cause problems for a lot of people because of their anti-nutrient qualities. But the fact they're all covered in glyphosate. So it's kind of like, no, we don't need plants as humans to thrive. You can have them, but again, I always treat people very uniquely. Everyone needs to be treated within their own space of what's going on for them mentally and physically. And some clients are on low carb and reversing amazing inflammation in their body and mental health issues, whereas other people need to go zero carb, no plants, and it's a full high fat, high protein diet.
Sure. Well, it sounds like whatever you were doing before was giving people really great results. If you cut out gluten, if you cut out sugar, that's going
Yes.
you're definitely going to experience benefit from that for sure. Were you surprised by the difference in benefits when you started getting people on the carnivore diet? Were you surprised at the difference between the two?
Huge, massive, and just myself too, right? So I've been now zero carb, zero plant for over 3 years, and it was just my own journey of, being insulin resistant, which is quite interesting, coming from a bodybuilding background, and I hadn't eaten gluten or wheat for over 10 years, so I knew that wasn't an issue. But it was more about the fact that I was like, hold on, how am I insulin resistant? And I just went full carnivore and reversed it, because I just knew that, hold on, I've got an insulin issue here with carbohydrates. And my carbohydrates are things like sweet potato or pumpkin and things like that. So it was still very, very like what you would deem species appropriate. But for my body, it wasn't working. So for me, I have seen the most amazing transformations, both mentally and physically, when people adopt really the proper carnivore way of eating.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's interesting on your story. I actually didn't know that. Do you suppose it was like frequent meals that you were eating
Yeah,
that was jacking up your insulin too much?
pretty much. So, bodybuilding language was, you eat every 3 hours to keep your metabolism up, all of those things, calories in, calories out. And, not really, the protein was kind of lower than the carbs, right? Because of the building muscle philosophy, and doing that for, over 10 years, that's where it got me into trouble. But also too, I thought, what, I'll do the carnivore thing for 30 days and I'll just see how I go. And because, I understand my body and I know what I kind of feel. And within 2 weeks, Casey, I had never experienced, the power of what ketosis is. So I went into ketosis pretty quickly because I wasn't coming off a SAD diet, which I call the standard Australian or American diet because it makes us sad. And for me, it was just, 1,000 light bulbs going off in my brain and the amount of energy. And I thought I'll give it a go for a month. And then, that's three years ago.
Yeah, that's very similar to my story. I did it about 3.5 years ago. I wanted to see if I was going to, never poop again if I decided to try carnivore. And I was stunned. I was already low carb. I'm sure I was in ketosis most of the time anyway. But the thing that really surprised me was my brain was totally different. And I would say it was about that same amount of time. It took about a week or two, but in a week or two, everything was better. The colors were brighter. I was more grateful. I was more present in my life. I could deal with stress better. I can't explain it unless I'm talking to another carnivore and they know what I'm talking about.
100%. And, this is the other thing when we're talking about the power of making sure that we're getting our body into a really high state of operation, because then that allows us to think better. It allows us to put in tools and strategies. And that's why I work the way that I do, because the thing is, as I said before, you can't think any further than how you feel, right? So once you start to actually shift and change that metabolic health, and you're right, trying to explain to someone on the outside of what actually happens when you remove all of that, ineffective food, it's very difficult. But when people feel it, they're like, oh, my anxiety has disappeared. And this is the other thing, Casey, that, we're still battling against, the fact that, there's so much resistance around allowing people to be empowered by going, what, I can reverse my depression, and I can reverse my anxiety, and I can reverse my type 2 diabetes, and I can even reverse my type 2 bipolar and my schizophrenia by using a ketogenic based way of eating. And again, medical and psychology models are very resistant in that, right? Because they're like, nope, that doesn't happen. That's just an anomaly. No, actually, let's just allow the body to operate in its most natural state, get back to ancestral tribal functioning, and look and watch what happens.